Turn on your inner light show. It's time to stop just surviving, and it's time to begin to thrive. It's time to live happier and healthier. Turn stress into strength. Noted author Debbie Mandel will show you how to move beyond personal doubts and fears and into positive perception to turn on your inner light. Here's your host, Debbie Mandel.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to my show. Our guest expert is Leslie R. Martin, Ph.D., a professor of psychology at La Sierra University, a research psychologist at the University of California, Riverside, a key associate in Dr. Friedman's longevity studies, and co-author of the Longevity Project. You might be surprised to learn why some people age well and others don't. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you for having me.
Now, are we talking about longevity or longevity coupled with health? Because I don't want to refer to the myth of Tithonus, who lived a long life and not a very healthy one.
No, you're absolutely right. In our study, we find that it is the healthier people and generally the more satisfied people that are also living the longest lives.
What was interesting to me when I read the book, which is filled with science, story, and all the complexities that make up a point, rather than just glib, smooth, salesman type points. I want to know, what are some of the beliefs that we have held true for longevity that you found really have some gaps?
Well, one of the things that I've heard a lot, and I know many people who've heard the same thing, is that you are going to work yourself to death. You're doing too much. You're taking on too much, and it's really going to hurt your health. And as a workaholic, I've always kind of had a concern in the back of my mind that maybe I was damaging myself by working long hours, and I get stressed. The Longevity Project really showed that that's not something that we need to be concerned about. People who worked hard in their jobs, who put in long hours, who oftentimes did not retire when they could have, really went on to live long lives. Not only did this not hurt them, but it actually helped them.
I want to discuss that with you. Were you really, or are you really a workaholic or someone passionate about your work? I mean, there's a difference between passion and compulsion. You sound as someone who's an artist at what you do.
I probably am, though, a bit compulsive, and I certainly put in a lot longer hours than many people I know. So I think workaholicism is defined by the person who's using the term. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned passion and really caring about what you do, and that, I think, is the key. So to work really hard at a job that you detest, there's nothing that suggests that's going to be very helpful. But most of the people who put in the long hours, they did it because they did care about their jobs. They felt that their jobs were important. They drew meaning from them. And that really seems to be crucial. So you may have some stress and you may have some negative aspects, but those are more than balanced out by the positive elements that you gain from that job.
But when we talk about stress here, I think we need to differentiate between acute stress and chronic stress. And acute stress has been shown by the medical community to be very beneficial to your immune system, to your brain, to all. Exercise is acute stress. Mm-hmm. But it's the chronic stress that Dr. Christakis from Harvard called a killer.
And even some chronic stress, depending on what it's associated with, in our study doesn't seem to be so bad. What we see as problematic is the chronic stress that's centered around things that really have no upside and really may be quite uncontrollable, and particularly those that have to do with other people, so interpersonal stress. But if you have stress, even chronic stress, that goes along with your job and its associated responsibilities, that really does not seem to be harmful.
I see. So again, it's the stress maybe you can control. Even at work, when you're excited about what you do, and you wouldn't, I don't even know if I would even call that chronic stress, if I may be so bold, because there are ups to it, there are relief sessions, but if you're a caregiver to an Alzheimer's patient, it's pretty, what do they call that, the 36-hour day?
Yeah, and that really, I think, is the kind of thing that, what is the positive thing in that? There really isn't much. It's a drain without the compensation.
Yes, well said. So if you're working and you get a creative compensation, then that's fulfilling to you, to your self-esteem, to your empowerment. Now, you also mentioned working past retirement. To me, that makes sense because of the brain. You want to stimulate your brain as opposed to sitting on a rocking chair.
Exactly, and stimulate your body as well. You're up and more likely to be doing things, and the social connections are also really important. Many of us have a good deal of social interaction that centers around the workplace, and to the extent that that may be weakened or even lost entirely following retirement, we see problems associated with that.
So is that why you said that the least religious women in your study live shorter lives, is because of the lack of community?
That really was the big component, yes. So when we looked at religiosity and saw that it was predictive, especially for women, of this longer life, what really was happening, what was driving that when we broke it down, was the social connection, the community engagement. We found that not only were people, and especially women, who were involved more frequently with others, whether that's coworkers or family members or friends, congregations, that was really good. But on top of it, if these individuals were doing things that benefited or helped others, that was an added bonus. And very often that's true of religious groups, that part of their mission is outreach and helping others.
That's a good point. So let's say atheistic women could reap the benefits if they did volunteer work and if they were engaged in atheist groups.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to the extent that you've got those strong social ties, and especially if those somehow help others, reach out. It could be any number of things, but volunteering is a great example that you're doing for others. That's going to garner for you the same kinds of benefits that we saw for the more typically religious women.
Is that related to personal empowerment? In other words, if I'm badly off, but if I can help others, I feel better about myself. I see my benevolent reflection in someone's eyes. Is that what you're saying about that?
Yeah, our study data don't directly talk about that or aren't able to look at that as a reason, but I think that absolutely makes sense. And it's along the same lines of what we see with the work. If you're finding meaning in your work, you're doing something that you think is important, has some benefit to society or others as a group. So I think we're seeing very similar patterns there.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Well, we will continue with more of Dr. Martin and the Longevity Project right after commercial break.
Now you can take Debbie Mandel home with you. Her book, Turn On Your Inner Light, Fitness for Body, Mind, and Soul, will help you decompress with healthy, positive, concrete solutions. Common life challenges are presented so that you can quickly find the help you need. Emotional tips, original meditations, and a fun and easy-to-follow fitness workout for each mindset. This revolutionary new method will help you rewire mind and body to take back your power. Get it on Amazon.
Are you overwhelmed with the burden of taking care of children, parents, or both? Are you taking care of everyone else except yourself? It's time to change your habits and re-energize. Debbie Mandel gives you an innovative and easy-to-follow program for good health and happiness. In her magical new book, Changing Habits, The Caregiver's Total Workout, Debbie Mandel shows you step-by-step how to find the optimal balance between giving and receiving and guides you to exercise and eat right to take care of yourself. What are you waiting for? Read Changing Habits and start training for your life. Life does not need to be a burden. Get Changing Habits, The Caregiver's Total Workout on Amazon.
You're listening to the Turn On Your Inner Light show. I'm your host, Debbie Mandel, and I'm speaking with Dr. Leslie Martin, co-author of the Longevity Project. Okay, Leslie, let's get right to it. Why do women outlive men?
I would say, well, certainly there are many reasons, but one of the key factors seems to be the social connections that women have. When we looked at masculinity versus femininity, we found that the more feminine women and men actually lived longer lives than the more masculine of both sexes. And part of that was tied up in health behaviors, although the health behaviors were not part of our measurement of masculinity or femininity. But the more masculine women did tend to do some of the more stereotypically masculine things, more drinking, more smoking, and particularly in the 40s and 50s, those were things that were less common for women to do. But when we looked further, it wasn't just the health behaviors, but it was other things like the social connections. Women, on average, have a much wider social network and a closer social bond with many of their female friends, so they can really talk about issues and gain all kinds of support, informational support, actual concrete help if they need it, emotional support. And men tend to have smaller networks. Oftentimes their wife or significant partner in their life is the one who provides almost all of that. So men really are at a disadvantage because of that.
And what you're also saying is if you have the masculine tendency, I guess, of being suppressed and silenced because it's not manly to emote about what's going on, that might bode poorly for cardiovascular health.
It really is detrimental, and we actually saw this was for all-cause mortality. So cardiovascular issues certainly, but we saw increased mortality rates associated with masculinity for cancer deaths and accidents and injuries, all kinds of things.
That's interesting. So I guess it compromises the immune system as well, and maybe masculine men don't seek health care.
Yeah, I would imagine that is the case.
So if you're not on top of things. I found this to be curious. Cheerfulness, a detriment?
Yeah, that was a real surprise to us as well, because there are a lot of other studies out there, and many of them very well-designed studies that have found the opposite. They say, it's good for your health to be optimistic. What we found is that when you're facing a crisis, so you're recovering from surgery or you're ill with something, and that is what most of these shorter-term studies have looked at, being optimistic and cheerful really is good for you in a crisis, in a short-term situation, because if you believe that things can get better, you're much more likely to stay engaged in the process of overcoming the obstacle that you're facing. But as a life approach, where every day, every decision you encounter, you've got this attitude of, everything will turn out fine, it's going to be all right. What that does is it leads people to evaluate risks differently, and this is true for big risks and little tiny things. And cumulatively, over the years, that really adds up to a significant risk factor.
I found that to be fascinating. In addition, would feigned cheerfulness fall under that category? I think a lot of women are cheerleaders.
Well, yes, and it's hard to tell with the data that we have whether or not individuals were feigning this. We thought of that as a hypothesis, and we didn't see any evidence that later on down the road they were more poorly adjusted. But I suppose they could have been continuing the facade even later on. So that is, I think, a possibility.
I think a lot of girls are raised to be cheerleaders and not to own what they do and to be responsible for other people's happiness. That comes at a cost. So I think that what you presented makes sense in light of that as well. We have an obesity epidemic now, and many people live a sedentary lifestyle as well. Based on your findings, what can we do about it?
We found that it really is important to be physically active. And one of the things that was kind of interesting is that those who were physically active earlier in life, maybe they played college sports and things like that, they didn't bank up this wealth of physical activity that they could use later on. If they became sedentary later on, that early life experience really didn't help them. What was important was being active later in life. And even if you began in midlife or after, that really gave you significant benefits. The other thing I think is really interesting is that so many people have this idea that they've got to do very particular things and they've got to do rigorous, hard activity. And that's so unappealing to many people that they may try it for a while, but they give up. They get bored or they get frustrated, and so they stop and they go back to the sedentary. What we found is that the consistency in being physically active is important, but it's not so crucial what you're doing. So if you love going out and running, great, by all means do that. But if you hate it, that's okay. Don't make yourself do it. Find something that you do like and do that, because you're much more likely to continue. And it can be gardening or walking or swimming or golf or woodworking, whatever it is that gets you up out of your chair and being active.
I noticed you didn't itemize housework.
No, but actually we have some little self-quizzes and things in the book, and one of them is helping people to quantify their own level of physical activity, because sometimes it's hard for people to really gauge how active am I relative to others. And we do have in there, for some vacuuming and general activities, how active that is.
But I guess it's not something we love to do. It's a kind of thankless work. So you're telling me that you really didn't find great benefit to, let's say, strength training, which is being touted now as lobes of steel, according to Dr. Fred Gage, and creating neuroplasticity and new neurons in the brain and building bone mass and muscle mass and a whole slew of good things. So that's not as important as just moving.
Well, yeah, and the key is so many people won't do that. In fact, almost no one in our sample, and part of this was because of the time in which many of these data were collected, people didn't do strength training. But if you're out working in your garden, pulling weeds, hauling things around, that still is strength training. You're building muscle, you're using your body, and that's key.
Especially if you mind your muscle, if you're aware of the compound movements. I'm an avid gardener, so I'm with this extended metaphor, and it's to be envied by gym members for sustainability and movement. But I think you have to think about what you're doing and execute it properly. We will return after commercial break with Dr. Leslie Martin, co-author of the Longevity Project. Dear listeners, I'm excited to tell you about my new book, Addicted to Stress. This is a message you need to hear. Are you addicted to stress? Do you do it all while everyone depends on you? Where's all this pressure coming from? It is coming from inside you. This is why my publisher, John Wiley, asked me to write Addicted to Stress, a woman's 7-step program to reclaim joy and spontaneity in life. This fun-to-read book teaches proven strategies to reclaim your life, silence your inner critic, build a healthy body, and reframe your thoughts to change your life for the better. Dare to be happy without the guilt. Addicted to Stress is easy to get. It's available at Barnes & Noble and other fine bookstores everywhere. You can also buy it at Amazon and other online retailers. We're back with Dr. Leslie Martin of the Longevity Project. Okay, Leslie, is there a mind-body effect?
Well, I certainly think that there is. We don't have data on that from our project, but we saw that many of the things that reflected themselves in satisfaction and a healthy mind and a healthy outlook were also correlated with physical health status.
All right, so you're buying into then meditation and the placebo effect if I choose to recite affirmations about myself. I mean, can I will myself longevity?
I think it's probably naive to think that we can just mentally work ourselves to a longer life, but I am an advocate of doing things that work for you. One of the things that was very striking in our study is that there wasn't a single path to a longer life. There are a lot of healthy paths. There are some common themes, but there are a lot of unique individuals, and what works for one person may not work great for someone else. So for some people, meditation may be really good. It may center them and focus them and bring that calm and rejuvenation. For someone else, it may drive them nuts.
Right. Well said. So it's not, so we shouldn't all reach out for yogurt. I loved when you brought up those commercials. And also the book made interesting assertions about genetics versus environment. That piqued my interest.
Yeah, it's certainly, genetics are important, but it's estimated that probably about a third of the variability in how long people live is due to genetics. So the genetics sort of set the parameters, and particularly when we're talking about people who may get to very old age, up over 100, that seems to be more tightly linked to genetics. But when we're looking at, people who die early, 50s and 60s versus going on into 70s, 80s, and even 90s, a lot of that is determined by things that people do. So we look at the elements that we study in the Longevity Project: personality, social ties, health behaviors. Those enable you to move around quite a bit within the window of opportunity that is laid out by genes.
I was also surprised to learn about conscientiousness.
Conscientiousness was the strongest predictor, both in childhood and adulthood, in a personality sense, of how long people lived. So individuals who were more prudent, they thought ahead, they were responsible, trustworthy, not impulsive, they really lived a lot longer. And it sounds like it might be a sort of a boring life, and I've had people ask me that, well, I don't think I'd want to live a long life that's like that. But really, because these people were responsible and prudent, they got a lot of opportunities. They had some very exciting lives because they could be depended on. And so they got to do a lot of things and live some of the more interesting lives in the sample.
Well, I am conscientious, and I've always been so, and I don't feel like I lead a boring life. I have a very rich imagination, and it's just that I'm not going to jump out of a plane, perhaps. But
right, yeah, and you're exactly right. You're a very good example of the fact that you can blend this conscientious self with a whole plethora of exciting, life
and creativity, right? Like gardening. I mean, creativity, you can be a conscientious creator, I guess. I never thought about that, but.
Absolutely. Yeah, and when we look at personality traits, there's no association really between high or low conscientiousness and the more openness to experience and creativity. So you could be very unconscientious and creative, but you could also be highly conscientious and creative and open.
So that's a relief to me. Now, if we want to learn more about the Longevity Project and about you and Dr. Friedman, how can we get to you?
We have a lot of information available on our website. It's howardfriedman.com.
Okay, and how would you spell Friedman?
Oh, Friedman.
Okay, that's great. I want to thank you for being a wonderful guest because you've been informative and not in a general way, but really making all the detours for us. Very on target. I urge everyone to read this book if you want to live a long and healthy life.
Thank you for having me on.
Be well. Affirmation of the week. The best elixir comes from mixing several different potions. And now for the latest medical trends. Female athletes who sustain a concussion report different symptoms than their male counterparts, according to the University of Virginia. The research revealed that in addition to headache, high school girl athletes were more likely to complain of neurological symptoms like sensitivity to light or sleeplessness. Their male peers, conversely, report neurocognitive issues like loss of memory or loss of balance and control. For more than 5 million Americans with heart failure, a critical step to better health is taking the medications they're prescribed. But many patients fail to do so, putting themselves at greater risk of hospitalization and even death. And I would like to say that some people don't take their medications because they can't afford them. Patients suffering from dystonia, an uncommon yet potentially crippling movement disorder, get better results if they begin deep brain stimulation therapy sooner rather than later, according to the Journal of Neurology. Mothers who were maltreated as children have an increased risk for giving birth to low birth weight babies. The findings by researchers at the University of Washington are the first to show that maternal maltreatment can affect the health of the offspring. Researchers at Mount Sinai School of Medicine have found that patients with Alzheimer's disease have lower glucose utilization in the brain than those with normal cognitive function, and that those decreased levels may be detectable about 20 years prior to the first symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. This new finding could lead to the development of novel therapies to prevent the eventual onset of Alzheimer's. Well, we're still waiting for that. An estimated 50 million adults in the U.S. suffer from arthritis, and according to the Centers for Disease Control, one of the best ways to combat the onset of arthritis as well as to control pain and improve function is through exercise. Well, we come to the close of another show. I have an educational website, totally free, turnonyourinnerlight.com, where all the radio shows with the guest experts are archived for your listening pleasure. Subscribe to my free newsletter for the latest show, emailed directly to you, along with the health tips fully delineated and a fresh new article on stress management at turnonyourinnerlight.com. Have a wonderful week and see you on the radio.